And in all of the social experiments, the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiment, what seemed to me really key is the one variable that mattered most for how willing you were to inflict power was how much somebody else in a position of authority was thought to be a figure of justice or a figure that represented a good version of authority. So even if you were doing something evil, it was supposedly on behalf of a larger cause and a good cause. It was fascinating to me. When people talk about the Milgram experiment, they rarely talk about how he ran it 16 different ways. And in each time he ran it, there was more disobedience. And so like if one person disobeyed, 90% of the other respondents disobeyed. That's a very hopeful sign, and that's rarely reported. When people talk about Milgram, it's always that people are willing to push the lever to 450 volts and kill the subject in that experiment. Rarely it's talked about in that the alternative experiment where one person said no, and then everybody went along with that, conformed to that possibility of protest. He also had gradations of how much you trusted the person who was giving the order. And that's fascinating. I almost want to rerun all of the Milgram experiments again for the other 15, right? We hear about the one worst result. That's interesting to me that we do. That's the story we all hear. And I'm not sure if that telling of the story, without the other 15 experiments that are basically counterexamples, isn't in itself a way to accustom you to the banality of evil, right? Telling the experiment, framing the experiment about that implicitly says all humans are bad, therefore, if you're not a hero, you're just human, right? You're just like everybody else. So there's a kind of a status quo, not even a status quo, a negative indoctrination that comes from only repeating 1/15 or 1/16 of the experiment and not the whole spectrum of that experiment.